Thank you, Phil. Thank you for joining us today at the CNT NAB Show Debrief. My name is Patrick Trivuncevic. I'm a solutions architect. That's quite bright, those lights. And today I'll be talking to you about workflows and the cloud, particularly about reimagining workflows that can be taken to the cloud today. Does anybody today have or is leveraging the cloud? Can I get a show of hands? Yep, a few people. So we'll go through some use cases today as well to show you how you could possibly be utilizing the cloud and leveraging it. We'll talk about some partner and vendor announcements with their cloud-ready products and services. And we'll take a look at a POC of a live production in the cloud that we could show you at Digistor today. So has the cloud era arrived? Well, I like to think of it as the forecast being partly cloudy. Yes, the cloud era is here and upon us, but as we just saw then, only a few of us have started to leverage the cloud. There are many products today, and there are more and more products being added to the media entertainment space that can help us leverage the cloud better. So what are some of the obvious benefits of using the cloud? Well, one of the things that I like to think about is support and maintenance, and the fact that you might need to continually keep buying hardware to make your workflows happen. Everyone's probably familiar with having some production storage, which requires a level of capital investment to be able to utilize that storage, to buy that storage. But then every 3 years or so, you need to upgrade that storage. It becomes end of life or end of support, and that you go through the journey again with spending more money to get your workflow working. The cloud can take away that layer of needing to buy hardware constantly. We can virtualize our services and take them to the cloud. That takes away the need for having to maintain hardware that's on premises, takes away the need for having engineers that are capable of maintaining this kind of equipment. When you move your physical servers and virtualize them in the cloud, you get a natural, or you get an inherent security benefit from being in the cloud. Most cloud platforms today enforce a very strict security policy and best practices for bringing your products and services to the cloud, and you benefit from having your applications there. One thing you may not be aware of in a lot of our products is that we have licenses that we have to pay for. And typically when you're thinking about licenses, you have to pay for the license for the entire year or for the entire perpetuity of that particular product. When you're thinking about cloud services, you can think about that product as that license is pretty much disappearing. It's now amortized across the cost of the service, and you're only paying for what you're actually using. One of the big things about the cloud, though, is scalability and on-demand services. And we heard a little bit from Shalandra about how Avid is enabling auto-scaling and on-demand services in the cloud. You can just imagine if you're a production house that has a limited amount of resources and requires to spin up some more resources, how challenging that can be. Often there's lead times for hardware and software, and you can't effectively ramp up people as quickly as you like. Being in the cloud, we can do on-demand services and scale them as needed and scale them down as needed. And with that, you obviously get a very attractive operating or OpEx kind of model. So you're sort of moving away from the need to have capital expenditure, and you move to a per second type billing. And that sort of introduces many interesting concepts. But one of the things it does do is essentially give us a new way of paying for services that we simply couldn't afford in the past. But there are some challenges. Some of these challenges are obviously around the cost as well. The costs are a little bit I guess obstructed or difficult to see. It might seem as though some of these services are relatively cheap. They're maybe half a second to run a particular instance in a cloud or something like that, or half a cent to run a particular instance in a cloud or something like that, but there are hidden costs that we're not really familiar with. Some of these costs are things like just having the service, idling, doing nothing, costs you money. Having things brought into the cloud costs you money. Taking things out of the cloud can also cost you money. And at Digistore, we're here to help you guys understand what those challenges and costs are. Some workflows are not suitable for the cloud. If you think about online production storage, that stuff is pretty hard to do. That's very high performance. It's just not suitable today to take that into the cloud. It would cost you a fortune. I think there was an exercise done by one vendor recently for about 20 T's of storage to run at a similar level of what we consider production storage today, and it was about $30,000 a month. So you can see there are some use cases that are simply not ready for the cloud. But today we have many vendors who are looking at enabling cloud and giving you an ability to leverage the cloud for your workflows. We heard earlier from Avid, who mentioned several different products and services that are cloud ready and cloud enabled. And one of the things that I like to talk about, and was just recently announced, was Avid's cloud spaces for their Nexus storage. And this is a very interesting product where it basically gives you on-demand storage tiering, something that's typically difficult to achieve with typical storage vendors, because it's a very complex sort of solution or a product that's required to make this tiering happen. This is now included in our Avid Nexus Pros or Avid Nexus storage lines. And I'll talk a little bit more about some other vendors as well who are moving into the cloud. As you can see, just about everybody is looking at doing something with the cloud. We have our major cloud platforms, AWS and Microsoft Azure, who are providing many of the building blocks that we need to provide our workflows in the cloud. Google's not on there at the moment, but they're sort of catching up. You know, they've got some more rudimentary building blocks. We obviously know that Avid and others have got some cloud-enabled and ready products. We have Zixi. We just heard from Zixi and how they are enabling contribution and content distribution with the cloud and IP streams. Storage and MAM vendors are also looking very carefully at the cloud. Many of our storage vendors, including EditShare and Quantum and Dell EMC Isilon, all have ways to tier off into the cloud. EditShare recently just announced their Flow MAM, which is a media asset management, that can now be containerized and put into the cloud along with the storage that would go with your MAM. And we'll talk about a use case where we're looking at a MAM. One of the other things that sort of excites me here and that not a lot of people talk about is PC over IP and having virtual workstations in the cloud and being able to spin those up as needed when productions ramp up and down. There's many more products that I haven't really got the time to speak about, but what I really wanted to get into was to talk to you guys about the different workflows and use cases where we can leverage the cloud. And I'll try to mention some products along the way. So, backup and archive, that's probably the first place most people think about when they think about leveraging the cloud. Why? Well, there's several storage options that the cloud offers that are very economically viable, and we'll have a quick look at this. So, this is a typical post house, perhaps, my little drawing here. We have some production storage. We have some clients who are working on this production storage. In a typical environment like this, you might have some backup and archive servers that will be doing their backups and archive to a storage destination. Traditionally, this has been something like an LTO tape or a tape library that might manage this, or you might repurpose or use some nearline type storage for some faster type access to your backups or archives. But the problem with this is that this is still the traditional method, and you still have to invest in hardware. You need some backup and archive software. You need some backup and archive server to run this. Then you'll need a storage destination for where you're going to back up and archive. As we all know, when it comes to backup and archive, it's not really backed up unless you have multiple copies. One way to make multiple copies or to leverage the cloud or not to need more physical equipment is to basically use the cloud and use storage in the cloud. So let's have a look at what that might look like. We have our cloud platform. It could be Amazon, it could be Azure, it could be GCP. But what we really need is some storage in the cloud. And there's several different types of storage systems that you can get in the cloud, but the most basic, and I think everyone's probably heard of it, is S3, Simple Storage Service. And this is different to traditional file systems and storage that we know of. It's object-based, so it has different ways of being protected in the cloud. Object-based storage is typically replicated, and it's replicated amongst its own zones, and it can also be geo-replicated. This gives you this extra level of protection that you probably wouldn't get if you were doing this yourself on physical locations. So we get ourselves some S3 storage. What can we put in the S3 storage? Well, we can put our backups, our backup sets, our snapshots, versions and so forth into this particular storage. And we can also retrieve from this storage. One thing to note about S3 is fairly simple in terms of it's storage, but it's also very simple in terms of costs. It costs you to put stuff in, it costs you to keep stuff there, and it costs you to take stuff out. But it's sort of normalized as a nice minimum. But there's another type of storage which we kind of use, and we use this type of storage for long-term archives. Things like Glacier, and I like to think of Glacier as LTO in the cloud. Glacier is a cheaper type of storage, similar interface to S3. In fact, it is S3 with just cut down commands. But you don't get any guarantees on how long it will take to restore your data. It's meant for long term. It's meant for stuff that's going to be infrequently accessed. So if you have, if you think about archives that need to just be archived maybe for legal reasons or for any other reason, that doesn't need to be frequently accessed, you might put it into a Glacier. Again, you're paying for stuff that comes in, stuff that comes out, and stuff that's staying in there. But Glacier is much cheaper. It's cheaper because they're not going to guarantee you your retrieval times. You can pay for more or faster retrieval times if you wish, but that's an additional cost. You would use Glacier if you have a long-term need. And because we are in the cloud, we can now easily make this available to other regions and other sites that we might have. So it's quick and easy to add multiple sites to the cloud that can share similar resources and unifying your workflow for backup and archive. Now, this is what I like to call a hybrid solution. So we're not using the cloud for everything. We've got our application server here, our backup and archive server, but our storage is in the cloud. So we're using a bit of the cloud for storage, and we're using on-premises equipment to orchestrate our backups and archive. But you could take that server and put it up into the cloud. And in fact, many of our vendors today have offerings that are cloud ready and containerized, so you can move them between different cloud platforms should you need that. And as most cloud platforms do provide, they provide S3 storage, so you can have an all-in cloud solution all-in backup and archive solution in the cloud. Another great use case is asset management. And I mentioned briefly EditShare having Flow asset management out there, and now that's cloud ready. It's also available to your storage systems on premises as well. But I'm talking about the cloud today, so I'm going to mention how an asset management system may work in the cloud. So here's our site here, a typical site that might have some client machines again, and some production storage perhaps, and maybe an asset management system. An asset management system contains of several components. One of the components of the asset management system is the storage, where are you going to keep all these assets that you're collecting. Another thing is a database that has an index of all your assets and any metadata that might be associated with that. There's also things like transcoding and archive. These are sort of functions of a MAM. So there's a lot of components in the MAM. If you think about it, there's a lot of those components could move to the cloud. So let's have a look at what that might look like if we decided to take some of our equipment to the cloud for a MAM. Obviously, similar to backup and archive, so you can use storage to store your assets in. Now, there's multiple things you could do. You could store the high-res assets here, but again, remember there are costs associated for keeping things in the cloud and taking things out. Or we could keep proxies, so we can have quicker and easier collaboration between our regions or our sites. So the first thing is that you might think about putting, some of your content into the cloud and having that accessible between your sites. But this is a hybrid solution again. So all we've done here is taken our storage or our assets that would normally sit on some sort of database and move that to the cloud. So it's a hybrid solution. So you don't need to move all your workflows fully to the cloud, but you could. So let's have a look at what else we could do to make this more cloud inclusive. As we mentioned, there are those services like transcode, the application server itself. and the databases, they can all move into the cloud. In this instance here, we've taken the application server out, the asset management instance, and virtualized it in the cloud, and we've also connected it to our S3 storage. Now we have availability, we have security that can be replicated across multiple sites and zones. Now what else is the cloud doing? Someone mentioned AI, right? AI is interesting for asset management because it takes away an annoying function or requirement of asset management, which is tagging your assets and associating metadata with it. The cloud, as you know, is making a name for itself with machine learning and AI, and we're seeing companies now looking at systems for indexing and asset tagging using AI, giving users of the content access to information like scene sentiment, speech phonetics, and other things like that makes it easier for you to search on. This is one that I think is really cool, rendering, because it demonstrates the cloud's real power, which is the ability to auto-scale on demand and meet your sort of work requirements. So here again, typical sort of render farm, bunch of render nodes. We might have a repository where we keep our assets. We have a render manager, which manages our renders, and we have clients who need to use the render farm. So you can see how this is somewhat complex and could be difficult to grow. If you're a VFX house or a house that, or a production company that requires a lot of rendering, you know that you typically have limited resources. You have X amount of nodes that can do rendering. You might be tech savvy and you might know how long it takes you to render particular types of things, but it becomes really difficult to predict your workflow when you have periods of demand and periods that don't have demand. And how do you size and scale your render farm? Can you just keep growing it? Can you keep buying more equipment? Do you have to maintain those physical servers and those boxes and the power and cooling that's associated with it? No, you could leverage the cloud. Let's have a look what that means. Again, we find ourselves with a cloud platform. We're still doing our work down at our on-prem site, but we decided it's crunch time and we've got a new shot that's been given to us and we hadn't planned for it, but we have to render it anyway to make it into the show that's happening on Monday. So you go, don't worry, I can spin up some more render nodes and it's not going to take several weeks to get those render nodes. I can do that pretty quickly. So what I do is I configure my render management application to basically tie itself to a service that's in the cloud, and together the render management and the portal coordinate the resources that are required to scale on demand. Once the render is being kicked off, the render manager coordinates with the portal to grab all the assets on-prem to the cloud, because we need to render in the cloud, we need our assets to be in the cloud. So we might move them to something like S3, but if you know much about rendering or VFX software, you can't typically render on object storage. You need a file system or some sort of shared type storage. So the portal will coordinate the movement of assets from S3 to a block type storage in the cloud. In Amazon's case, it's an EBS type volume, elastic block storage. But there are other volumes out there that also mimic file and block level storage. Once we have our storage enabled, we move our assets from S3 to that storage so we can then begin working on our scenes that need to be rendered. The render manager decides on how many render nodes should be spun up to complete your job in a specific time frame, and that automatically spins up, processes its job, and then spins down. So you can see if you're a small production house or even a mid-sized production house, it doesn't have all the resources, how you could leverage the cloud to spin up on-demand render nodes when needed. This is a hybrid solution. Of course, you still have some equipment on-prem. You have your render management, you have your clients who are working on-prem, and you may have some render nodes just to keep on-prem. You may not, but you can move all that stuff into the cloud effectively. And coming towards the end of my presentation, I wanted to talk to you about a POC that we've developed at Digistor and we're demoing to our customers. It's a POC of a live production in the cloud. And what we'll see in this POC is someone capturing a source, transcoding that source, editing and delivery. So in this POC, we might have our little fellow out here who's going out to record this event. Maybe this guy here is recording me. And he has either an encoder or a camera that's enabled with streaming abilities, IP streaming abilities, something like a Zixi-based encoder of sorts, or in my case, when I demonstrate this particular POC, I use my phone and use the Zixi application to send my stream to the cloud. So we configure our guy who's capturing stuff to an endpoint somewhere in the cloud. Again, we have our cloud. We have our endpoint. So we have an instance that they're up in the cloud which is collecting the streams, the RTP streams or the Zixi streams that are coming in, and doing something with it. It's basically capturing them. But Zixi streams and RTP streams are very difficult to work with in terms of editing, so we need to transcode them. We need to transcode them into something more friendly. So in this case, we do some transcoding to some HLS formats and other things that we use for editing. And then our NLE instance, in this case, where I'm talking about Blackbird in my POC, Blackbird will pull the content that we've just transcoded from AWS Media Live into its instance in the Blackbird Edge server, which will then do a secondary transcode to a low 2 megabit codec. That 2 megabit codec allows us to remotely do our workflows. We can see our clips, we can see essentially proxy versions of our clips in a highly optimized 2 megabit codec. Once that arrives and is pulled into our Edge server, our guys who are out in the field or on the prem somewhere are ready to edit it. All this happens within 15 seconds. So the camera guy is out at an event, imagine maybe something like an esports event or a news event, and he's told to capture something that's happening right at this very instant. 15 seconds later, that material will be appearing in the Edge NLE instance here and be ready for our editors to start editing. Our editors will have some kind of web-based type NLE, which will interface with the 2 megabit codec, allowing the users to quickly operate on the footage that's arriving. Once the editors are happy with their edits, they can obviously then push that back into the cloud and then deliver. Maybe deliver to a CDN or to a video on demand player or even YouTube or a file. But as you can see, this is a whole workflow that's all in the cloud. We have our capture coming in, captured in the cloud, then transcoded, then put into a format where we can edit real quickly, 15 seconds after capturing, and then deliver to either a CDN or somewhere else we want on our networks. So I hope that's given you some insight and some workflows that can leverage the cloud today, and I urge you to come and talk to us at the back there about some of these workflows and some ideas that you might have on how to leverage the cloud. And we're here to help you guys. And I've been Patrick Trivuncevic. Thank you for that.